You are tuning in to Access Live, a show about raising awareness, what's going on in the community, and to address the issues that impact youth and their families that have serious emotional and behavioral challenges. We are located at the Brookins Building at 1776 East Washington in Urbana, Illinois, and at the downtown location at 202 West Park Street.
Well, good morning, everyone. Actually, it's the afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Access Live, sponsored by the Access Initiative, a community education and engagement project of the Access Initiative. I'm your host, Imani Bazzell, and you know how thrilled I am about how lovely it's been outside the past few days. We got a really, really good drenching of rain. You know, that's good, that's cleansing. Our guest today might tell us what a cleansing rain looks like in mental health terms. That'd be good, so keep that in mind. Right. Everybody's garden's looking great. Mine's even looking better. Lord, if I could get the help I need to finish it up, I'd invite everybody over for a glass of lemonade. But anyway, I hope your day and week has been going well. We are here at Access Live doing the third of a three-part series that we've started around the question of anger and violence in our community, and what the best responses to those are. And we really want to take time this week to what some people call unpack it even more, what we grew up calling breaking it down a little more, so we can really make sure everyone in the listening audience feels like they leave the show today with a better understanding, and if anybody wanted to talk to you or you want to talk to someone else, that you would feel more confident and articulate in those conversations, and what we can do besides talk about them and complain about them. What does the real work on the ground looks like? And we know it has to happen on multiple levels. It happens between individuals who may be in conflict. It happens inside of nuclear and extended families. It happens in neighborhoods. It happens in what we call our community at large. And you know, I'm gonna say the best model might be war. I can't figure out the last time the United States wasn't engaged in some kind of war or turmoil in the rest of the world. And if we want to follow our nation's model for how to deal with neighbors, I don't know that that's a good model. I don't know that we want to be the quote-unquote policeman of the world, which then would make us think we got some kind of power to be telling everybody else what to do and how and live in our own neighborhoods, instead of being more democratic in the way we talk about and do community and mental health. So again, I'm so pleased to have with us in the studio the Access Initiative Coordinator for Wraparound Services, Training, and Technical Assistance, Miss Karen Crawford Sims. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. You always do such this great, amazing lead, so you're always so great.
I'm just on autopilot here, girl. You just got to stop me when I'm wrong.
No, always great.
So, Karen, one of the things we're going to do today to, again, really help people feel like, I got this, I can talk about this myself, be more likely to respond as though it's another thing. Like if I thought you were doing something and, you know, I thought you were dogging me out.
That's right.
But really, had I been in a more copacetic place, I could have been able to understand your behavior as something quite different than that. But I'm quick, and oftentimes when we're quick to decide what something means, regrettably, it's often the negative view of things that we take instead of taking a a little while to really think about it. This Covey idea we talked about, right? Putting space between stimulus and response. So if you respond to something right away, that's like responding by impulse.
That's right.
Versus if something happens and you take some time to think about it first, you may still respond the way you would on impulse, or you may say, actually, I can respond differently.
Absolutely.
Because you put some space there.
That's right. And the way the brain works. So we were talking about stimulus response, the way that the brain works, right, this fascinating thing. One of the reasons why we just sort of go with what feels most intuitive, the bottom part of the brain, right, the brain stem, right, we do much more impulsive behavior.
That's right.
That's why
that's what they call the old brain.
Right, yeah, and so that's why Covey says think a little bit, because we want to get you to the prefrontal cortex. We want you
that's
to
y'all's forehead.
Right, we want you to think about the big brain, not the little brain.
And it's what makes us different
from animals.
From other animals.
So that we want you to give some thought to what's going on, so that you have access to more thoughts. So let's go back to complex trauma. So if I have been in situations where I have learned, the brain, think about it as a note card. Remember, my metaphor is always, it's like a note card box. Anybody ever seen those boxes of note cards? The brain has some note cards. So from the time you're born, it starts to put memories onto note cards, and that's how we learn. And so if I've learned that for a lot of different reasons, I feel powerless, right? And I learned that anytime that I feel powerless, that I need to act out because I need to protect myself from feeling powerless. Anytime, even legit, right? So the cashier that doesn't put the change in my hand,
right,
or the person who looks at me funny, I start to put all of those feelings onto that powerless note card. Now again, there could be a whole range of other feelings associated. The cashier could be having a bad day, and my neighbor could have not seen me, but instead I go, powerless means somebody's made me feel powerless. I put it on the note card, and that means I got to protect myself, and that means I have to act out.
And
and I don't even have to think about it, because I just file it away on my powerless note card. And what we want to do, right, we talk about protective factors, and that whole thinking and best practice is helping broadening people's range of options, right?
Broadening ranges of options, and so I think really additionally broadening their sense of their place and other people's place in the world,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah. And so, but in terms of empathy, in terms of an empathetic response, sometimes in order to broaden it, I got to take a little bit of the pressure off. Because if I never, ever, ever feel like I have power and agency, the ability to control my environment, if I never have power and agency, I just will stay stuck.
Yes.
And so you got to give me a little wiggle room. So again, we look like sometimes the youth in our community or adults in our community who are engaged in violence, people say stuff like they're just throwaways, or they don't, or they can't, or whatever. And what has happened is we just haven't given them enough opportunity to feel broadly. There's no safety.
And we've allowed ourselves to come up with this them and us thing.
That's right. And
even inside the black community, because I hear a whole lot of black slamming.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Inside the black community. But speaking of little stories, I think this might be a Wayne Dwyer story. I'm not sure. I'll tell it, and you'll recognize it. So there is this man who's got maybe 3 younger kids, and they've gotten on a city bus, and the kids are seriously acting up. He's just sort of sitting there with his head down. He's not really managing them. He's just sort of sitting there, and other people on the bus are becoming aggravated that he's not managing his kids. They're sort of running up and down the aisles and bothering people, and someone finally says, "Sir, can't you get control of your children?" And he looks up and he says, oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so tired. We're so distracted. My wife just died.
Yeah, that's a Wayne Dwyer.
Their mother just died, and they're acting that out, and I'm so sorry. Let me get and that completely changes everything.
Yeah.
Exact same circumstances. but flip the script just a little bit.
All right. Yeah. The mitigating circumstances. For legal terms, we're gonna go legal.
If you knew
the story,
if you knew the backstory,
that's right.
You might not have been experiencing those children as a problem.
Absolutely.
And you might not have assumed he was a bad parent.
That's right. You contextualize the behavior.
Yes.
Because frequently, remember, feelings and behaviors frequently, most of the time, make sense.
Yeah.
Once you know where they come from.
Exactly.
But, as a community, we got to do a better job of giving people access to feeling a lot of different ways and healthy expressions of anger.
This whole name it and claim
that's
it.
That's right. That saying, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. If you don't, it will destroy you. I love that, right? Because if we don't allow our kids healthy expressions of anger, to know what they're feeling, healthy expressions of power and grandiosity and all those things, it'll come out. It just won't come out in a way that we like it as family, as community, as people. And so how do we be really respectful of who our kids are and who our community, our neighbors are, and what our community is and what people need.
Absolutely.
Because, we want people to be healthy and actualized, and we want to be safe. You and I were joking about that.
Yeah, we want to be safe. Now, I think I've mentioned before, I watch a lot of those shows like addiction and hoarding and like the extreme weight loss,
all of those,
those things. Because I'm trying to watch the story of how people don't for no reason become super obese.
That's right. No.
People for no reason don't become heroin addicts who have to sell their bodies or steal every day to get. They're not a bad seed. They were just born bad.
That's right.
And I gotta tell you, I'll tape them, maybe then I'll do marathons, right? Because I can't catch on to everything every day. But if I see something listed, I'll set the machine to record it. And I tell you, what's behind it is always some kind of trauma.
Yeah.
When they tell the story and really trace it back, the people who are experiencing it can't always name it.
That's right.
But it is almost always maybe, a mother died at a very early age, sexual abuse. Almost always some kind of sexual abuse has happened, either in the family, but oftentimes in these stories, it's a friend or a neighbor or even a stranger, and the kid may have never spoken up. So nobody knew. Or they spoke up and nobody believed them. Or maybe they spoke up but still couldn't get justice. So there's always trauma behind the obesity, behind the addictions, etc., which of course is about addiction. And when you talked about people having feelings and then deciding what to do with those feelings, some people who don't have the stuff we're trying to share today, they take care of the feeling by eating. Others take care of it by smoking or shooting something up. Some take care of it by bullying other people.
That's right. And we're going to take a break, I know, but you do realize, statistically, one of the number one contributors to male aggressive community violence is growing up in a family where there's domestic violence.
That's right.
It's one of the number one predictors of community violence. So boys who are exposed to family violence statistically are more likely to grow up unfortunately, for lots of real important reasons that I hope we can come back and unpack around sexism.
That's
they grow up engaging in frequently aggressive, violent acts.
Even though at the time when they were young kids and it was going on between their parents, they may have felt traumatized and they didn't want it to happen. But yet somehow it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely.
So we will come back to
that powerless.
That's right. So we're going to take a quick break. Y'all don't go nowhere. This is Access Live, and we'll be right back.
Access Live can be heard every Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. on WBCP 1580 AM in Champaign-Urbana. You can learn more about the Access Initiative by visiting their website at www.access-live.org. access-initiative2.org.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Access Live. I'm your host, Imani Bazzell, and in the studio with us today, discussing anger and violence and moving forward in understanding it, being able to discuss it with others, and what are actual problem-solving solutions that we, everybody in earshot, could use to begin to live in the kinds of families and communities that we all find safe and happy. Places where we don't have to discard people to do that. Because a lot of people think the answer is just build a higher fence, right?
Or a bigger prison.
Or a bigger prison. So, we were, before the break, talking about early traumas in people's lives leading to the overeating, addictions, acting out, that kind of thing. And Karen, you were making the specific point around domestic violence, which is a form of family and community violence, that a very high rate of girls who grew up in that environment end up being victims of domestic violence, and a great percentage of the boys end up becoming perpetrators.
That's right.
Yes.
Perpetrators not only just in family violence, but in community violence.
In community,
I wanted to
right.
talk about that as a community issue.
So actually, if we can go there, I'm going to start throwing terms at you and you start teaching us about
and I know we want to do terms, but let's also, I guess let's paint, I was thinking, let's paint a picture. So imagine a boy growing up in a home, or boy or girl growing up in a home, because we want to make sure we talk about complex trauma, because you asked me about that first.
I'm going to let you get to that when I bring up PTSD. Do we want to create a do we want to create a family?
Let's do that.
What's his name?
Absolutely.
What's her name? Okay.
So, boy growing up, imagine, unfortunately, because statistically, let's tell the truth, right? Statistically, he's probably growing up to a single mom.
Yes.
Who is probably economically challenged, right?
Okay,
so he's got some struggles.
So Jamal is now mid-teen? What is
Let's
he?
put him younger. Let's put him.
Okay.
Let's make him 8.
Okay, Jamal is 8 years old. He lives in a neighborhood that is in the older part of town, around other people who are poor and at best working class. His mom, Kanika, is a single mother trying to make ends meet as she can. What else do we know about him?
So more than likely, Jamal has moved multiple times.
Okay.
So that's a trauma. You guys know that that's a move.
And may have been in multiple schools
already. Probably, Kanika probably has not had the best consistent child care, because although we keep acting like child care is easily accessible, when you are economically disadvantaged, you frequently have to rely on whatever you can get. So, right?
Yeah.
That's true, right?
Can I break in and say, did you see on the news yesterday, where they arrested this sister because her daughter was at the playground playing all day. She'd given her a cell phone so she could call, and because their laptop had been stolen or broken, the mother worked at McDonald's, and the daughter would just come and sit in the back and play on the laptop while mommy worked. And she begged, can I please go to the park instead? There's always a lot of people at the park, so felt like it would be safe. Someone noticed after a while that she wasn't there with the parent and called the police. And instead of saying, oh, I should not only watch my kid, but maybe this one's too, but the child,
ended up,
had food, had a cell phone to call if she had a problem, was having fun all day just like all the other kids, but that mom ended up in jail.
That's right. So I want to talk. So
Kanika could have ended up in jail. Was the
absolutely.
point?
And what we know about the time a kid ends up at 8, particularly for kids who are from. This is not always, because I want to make sure we end by talking about protective factors.
That's
but
right.
for people who are socially isolated, who don't have an extended network, who don't have access to friends and family, who don't have educational stability, who don't have other resources, who don't have some of the internal resources, right? So people who are fragile, by the time kids are 8, they have been exposed to around 6 traumas by the time they're 6, right?
Yeah.
And so by the time they're 8. And that most of that, think about most of the time, the way that we learn feelings, right? We learn feelings with words, which doesn't happen until like 3.5, 4. And
so
we
these
write
traumas, 6 traumas, give us a couple of examples.
So traumas, the moves.
Right. So they're uprooted from the friends they just made.
If mom is super stressed, she's probably got some mental health needs. That's a trauma. So you can't respond to you guys know when you're super stressed, you can't parent in the way that you want.
Right.
So maybe
she may just order him around
and not
more
do a
than
lot
she hugs
and not
him,
to,
maybe.
that's not have access to all of the emotional attunement, the way that you look at your kid, and
she's wore out.
She wore out because you can't, right? Nobody can do it by themselves as well as they can if they had more support. She probably might have had a relationship that maybe wasn't the best because she didn't have maybe it's access to all the right kind of choices and voices because she's doing it by herself. So that's probably a trauma. Might have engaged because she might not have disciplined him in the right way. Just because she's stressed, and sometimes acting out and lashing out is easier than taking the time and or pause and wait before you lash,
before you strike.
So you act out of anger, which is always much more aggressive than if you had waited a bit. So all of those kind of food insecurity is a trauma. You guys forget, if I don't have access to enough to eat. So all of those
or have to feel embarrassed to get the food I
That's right. So but early, when kids are young, when you don't have words to think that complexly, not having food makes you feel, when you're not thinking about the world and don't have the intellectual capacity, you just know hunger.
That's right.
And that feels like you can't trust in the world to provide, to meet your basic needs,
That's right?
Basic needs. So emotion, can I rely on the people to care for me in the way that they need to care for me? Can they take care of me? All of those are the kinds of basic traumas that happen really early on.
Yes.
And then we add like school and teacher engagement and all, right? Like, so we're just talking about a variety of different things that really hurt you. And then we expect, and then imagine if their mom enters into a dating relationship that's violent. And I've had all those other things that tell me the world isn't safe, I can't count on the people to trust me, and so now the one person who I thought could keep me safe can't.
And is actually maybe causing me harm.
Right? Then I start to learn, probably particularly for boys, that I need to figure out something to do to take care of myself.
Yes.
And the ways that I take care of myself is I deny my wants and needs, right? Because I've learned that I can't count. If I'm hungry and people don't feed me regularly, I got to pretend like I don't feel hunger, right? So I'm going to pretend like I'm not there. And then I can't feel emotionally safe because I can't trust on the people who I count on to do that. So I just start to shut out. And then the way that I see that, right, that men who are in control act, and we have that image in lots of different places.
We do.
They act violently, and that seems to be the way to get where I want. So I don't think about what I feel, and I act violently because that's the way to control my environment. And hence, we look like we have a community violence problem, but really what we have is people who are, hurt, wounded with complex trauma. Not just a one thing. It's the so you have to unpack all of that story.
Absolutely. And this brings up the question of being what we might call bilingual or bicultural or multicultural, not in terms of race, but in terms of what people in academia call code switching.
That's right.
So, I was rereading one of Ta-Nehisi Coates' pieces recently online. Who's ever watching and listening, I would encourage you to, Google the brother Ta-Nehisi Coates. If you don't spell it right, Google it.
You're still gonna get it. Yeah, absolutely.
Got some really nice pieces along here, and he had done a piece where he talked about at work getting in trouble because maybe he used a strategy that worked in his neighborhood that is a completely reasonable way of thinking and being in that neighborhood, because you got to protect yourself. That's maybe but it's not a reasonable response
Absolutely.
in the work environment, right? So that's code switching to know how, and he uses this little thing about, if a brother comes up to you, it's like, hey, shorty, let me see that bike, right? That means he's finna steal your bike.
Absolutely.
And you got to take some countermeasures.
That's right.
Versus something happening at work, you don't take those countermeasures. Right. And so the thing that I love about him in his 100% defense of Black America and Black culture, and not having things that aren't Black culture being called Black culture, like a culture of violence being used synonymously with Black culture, like a community of poverty being used synonymously with Black culture. He's saying you got to tease those out, right? Yeah. So I love the way that he defends us, and he's so smart and so crisp. And so I think that's useful here to note. There are times where the correct response is to jump back, right? Yeah. Is to stand your ground.
That's right.
If you're in an environment where that's appropriate. Yeah. The question is, are you multilingual? In that's the language of the streets.
Can we go back to unpack the stand your ground? Because again, human beings are brilliant.
Yes.
Right? And we have amazing brains that are very complex. And I think sometimes, and you know this because I grew up in an urban environment, stand your ground can look a lot of different ways.
Yes, it can.
And unfortunately, sometimes we believe it only looks like one way.
Right.
And so sometimes turning on the brain, right, creating some space between thought and action actually gives you much more effective ways of standing your ground, but we haven't taught kids that.
It's not just one. Right. Somebody hits you, hit them back.
Right.
That's one response.
Way. That's one response.
There could be a multitude of responses.
That's right. And actually, there's some pretty sophisticated responses that if you teach your kids, you build in that cultural adaptation, right?
Yes.
That ability, as you were talking about code switching, you build in the skills that are transferable because most importantly, if we're talking about school and educational success and professional success, you got to have access to your whole brain. Remember, I talked about the more you have file cards of knowledge and experiences and the more locations you have, the better you are to learn and your brain can grow. So that's why we want to give our kids, we never want to act like there's only one way of doing something.
Exactly.
So stand your ground, to keep brainstorming with your kids. So you could hit them back, and what else could you do?
Right.
And what else could you do? And not act like that there was just one way to stand your ground.
And then if this happened, and then this happened, what could you do?
That's right.
And here's 3 or 4 things versus, and again, it is this I love, and I think we're going to keep using this language on the show. Are we relying solely on our small brain or our big brain?
That's right, absolutely.
So what our small brain, that's the older part of the brain, that's more animalistic, that's where
actually
instinct
the snake
comes
part of the
from.
brain.
The snake
that's
part
also
even,
the snake. It's the reptilian part of your brain. It's not even animal. It's really like
right, because reptiles came before mammals.
That's right.
So the stuff that when somebody is brain dead, sort of.
That's right.
That's the only stuff that's still working, but it won't let you see or speak or think, right? And we're saying, let's use our whole brain, and as often as possible, the front part of our brain, because there's a whole other layer that we got that the other ones didn't get, called the prefrontal cortex. That's, again, like what's behind your forehead. Then we cooking with grease.
Absolutely.
When we talk about freedom and liberation and self-determination, isn't that what we're talking about here? That's not always something relative to, the white man ain't gonna get me. Yeah. It's about how do we practice it in our own
every
lives.
Day. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking off air. Having an anti-oppression stance is key to addressing community violence. And I hope we end really thinking about what does it mean to really adopt. We had talked in the anti-domestic violence and the sexual assaults. movement, we talk, both are oriented in you have to have you have to end depression if you're going to keep women safe and families safe and children
safe. So this
ain't
about everybody go learn Taekwondo.
No, absolutely.
Right. But some people think, okay, as a woman, I need to learn self-defense, or I need to get a gun license and carry a gun. That's not gonna stop rape, sexual assault, domestic violence.
Absolutely.
It might halt for a minute an incident,
and statistically not really, because
a lot of times it get turns on your butt.
Because most of the time, because if you're a thinker, the thing that separates you from people who don't think is the thing that could cause you harm.
That's
right? Because if you think about it, then you're vulnerable.
Yeah, your reptilian brain's got you thinking you need a gun.
That's right.
So interestingly, I was having this conversation with someone. I left that conversation on my way to the studio to get ready for this show. I had been meeting with this local woman whose daughter had some experiences in a college-age relationship with a young man she'd been involved with for years that got violent. And as she reflected back, she was able to realize that it had actually been going on for some time.
Absolutely.
She just hadn't been calling it and naming it that. So they brought her home. We, done some work. She's actually doing well, but still has these things to work out, because when we talk about domestic violence, we're not just talking about between married people. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of what we call domestic violence between people who live in, people who simply have dating relationships.
Teen dating violence.
Sometimes it's called dating violence, but it's under the rubric of domestic violence. But anyway, to get to your point, she was talking about a counselor they went to go talk to, who specialized in sexual assault and domestic violence, and how unsatisfied she felt. Because she was saying that it felt like what was said, that this person was actually given very little information, and with this very little information she had given, she was able to roll off all of this stuff. Well, it's because of this and it's that, and it began to feel like a real sort of man-hating or man-blaming thing, and wasn't really getting to what my daughter was actually experiencing, which was a complex relationship.
Absolutely.
And she knew he had a history of coming up in a family with violence, and said all of what we've been talking about. And I was able to explain to her that's the difference, because black women and then other women of color, we started rape crisis service centers and domestic violence shelters in the context of a movement.
That's right.
In the context of anti-oppression work. Because when you approach a man hitting a woman in the context of understanding racism, sexism, classism, etc., you're not going to come out thinking, well, what I need to do is just hate all men.
That's right.
You're going to come out a bigger and broader person and understand the violence you're experiencing is a part of a much broader construct.
That's right.
And after I explained that to her, she said, oh, thank you, I get it now.
That's right.
That's why we weren't responding well. It felt like we were just another number, that she wasn't really listening to who we were.
That's right.
So we made some real progress today on that. So we have got to take another break. We're going to get back to a very interesting discussion. I'm going to share some questions you all have shared with me to have Karen try and answer. We'll play it like a game show or something.
Okay.
Let's see what we come up with. This is Access Live. We'll be right back.
The Access Initiative mission is to build a trauma and justice-informed system of care designed to create a healed community that works to ensure that youth and their families are resilient, resourceful, responsible, and restored.
And we are back. This is Access Live, a community education and engagement initiative of the Access Initiative. We're here every Wednesday from 2 to 3. We're going to be talking about love ethic. We're going to be talking about what it takes to get us to the mental health and well-being of the African American community. We bring you words, we bring you terms, we bring you stories, ideas, research, whatever it takes for us to get our arms around practicing kujichagulia, which is Swahili for self-determination. It can't always be someone else's fault. The more we take control of our own life and our family and community's lives, the happier and more well-functioning we will be. Today, we are continuing our conversation on anger and violence, and being able to understand that anger is in fact a legitimate emotion to have, but it has a multitude of ways of being able to be expressed. And we also talked about the goal of using our big brain, which is using all of our brain, and especially what we called our prefrontal cortex, where we do much higher order thinking, as opposed to our reptilian brain or our small brain, the older part of our brain, and that's the part where everything's automatic and just sort of keeps the heart pumping and some other stuff. That Karen says even is below animalistic. She said reptile, that other animals and mammals got even more sense than this part of our brain. It's that part right back there, the brainstem part there. That's where all our impulses and basic instincts are. But we're so much bigger and broader and more complex than that. So this show then, we're saying, is about how to embrace our full complexity as human beings and recognize each other's humanity and complexity, so we aren't having the same old conversations over and over again and getting nowhere. So let's throw some terms out here, okay? So we've already talked about what community violence is. And we included in community violence, we said, is domestic violence. That's a particular manifestation of community violence. So don't be trying to leave stuff out. That's a part of it.
Absolutely. And everybody's impacted by it. That's the other thing, is that even if one of the things that we were shocked about is, I don't know if everybody knows, but for everybody who we work with at Access, we do something called a trauma screen. We just sort of get a feel for what's happened. And this is really just so that we are sensitive to how to work with folks. But one of the things that shocked us when we first did it, because we're working with urban youth in Champaign, and we had an idea about what they talk about, was the number of youth who reported that they were impacted by terrorism and war. And I was like, there was no terrorism in Champaign. And so then I said, well, you guys, normally we just do it as a self-report, so we don't ask. And I was like, you guys are going to have to ask about this. And the kids started talking about just how much the constant talking about war impacts them. And I'm imagining if we were going to unpack how much, we asked the question, and one of the questions is around how have you seen people in your neighborhood or community fighting or engaged in violent behavior. I'm imagining for the next group of people we're going to see more of that, and we tend to say, well, if you didn't directly see it, then you weren't impacted.
You can be traumatized by what you watch, and when you start relating to the characters,
and they respond to it just like they're living it. When it shows up on the news, or when they hear about it, or it impacts a friend of a friend. So I think we need to stop acting like our kids aren't impacted by the stuff that happens, because you're like, well, you're not in that neighborhood, but their friends are, and they hear about it.
That's right.
And it changes their behavior, and it impacts their sense of safety. So anything that changes your sense of safety, see it as a trauma.
That's a trauma, and so that's what we continue to talk about. And Karen, the thing that's exciting to me, just in the past year, I'm hearing more and more people use the term trauma, which feels like we're really making progress. And in some unexpected places and ways.
I know.
I mean, seriously, people in the hood, right? I'm talking with them, and they pull out the word trauma before me. I'm like, go on and get it. What you know about some trauma? tell me.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, and they can tell me. And I'm like, I love this.
Absolutely. So let's go back. I know you were going to go to the list, but we were talking about anti-oppression right before we went off at our break.
Yes, please do that.
And, and I was saying, hey, maybe that should be one of the vocab words because we throw it around. And I thought, I have a list in front of me from the CDC, right? Not like some
Centers for Disease Control,
not some leftist organization, about protective factors that deal with trauma.
Yes.
And I think if we think about them and unpack them, how they would help change anti-oppression, changing oppressive factors, policies, procedures, structures, ways of being. So things like protective factors to deal with violence are people who don't believe that violence and bad behavior are good. So like that's a protective factor. So raising your kids to believe and not being violent and seeing that as a bad thing. Protective, right? Mm-hmm. And we see how if you raised your kids to believe that, it would challenge the status quo.
Right.
It would challenge the ways of being. It would challenge how they see war. They say high IQ, but really I think it's really high emotional and intellectual intelligence.
They call that like EQ.
Right, yes. So it's having people who
emotional intelligence.
So having people who are educated, who value learning, who are informed, who are thinkers, who know feeling words, right? Yeah. And again, how does that challenge the status quo? Valuing education is right there. Having a belief in something bigger.
Yes.
They call it religiosity. But really it's just having a spiritual community and believing in something.
Whatever you want to call it.
Right. And does that not help connect people to a social class, social values that are different than the dominant culture? Right. Being connected to family, we talked about this a lot, connected to adults outside of the family, being able to talk with your parents about what's going on. Means that that means that we have to have some power issues worked out in the family.
You gotta have a relationship that lets you do that.
And that I believe that I'm not just so parental that I'm not approachable.
Yes.
That my heart is still open to you and I can hear you without always having to be right. That means that means I really worked out my power issues.
Which is really great. I remember a family who doesn't live here anymore, who we spend a lot of time with, where at the time the daughter was 4 years old, and we were the adults all in the room, daughters in and out, and the father says something, I don't remember what he said, and the little girl said, "Daddy, that hurt my feelings."
Absolutely.
And she marched out of the room. And instead of him laughing he took her completely seriously, went and got her, brought her back. Because if you embarrass somebody in public, you need to apologize in public, which is a whole other piece we should keep in mind. And he said, and instead of shutting her down, he let her express her emotion. And she was one of the most liberated kids I'd ever known. Exactly. Like when she laughed, it wasn't it was this big, full-throated, hearty laugh. Because that's a real laugh. Absolutely. It's not inhibited by what anybody. Those things like that, you could tell when you see those kind of things in a kid. They're being raised in an environment where there's freedom of expression.
That's right, and feeling.
Which doesn't mean
she
you
can talk
run
to
in the
her
house,
or she can talk to her parents
Absolutely
in any kind of way
not.
at any given time.
That's right. There's room.
So the other thing, now again, think about this from a policy angle. They said that the consistent presence of a parent when you go to school and when you come home every day and at bedtime. Now, first of all, right, how does that change workplace policy, what we value? I always thought it was funny that we want middle and upper middle class income women to stay at home with their kids, and we think that that's the best thing.
Right.
But poor women, we want them to go to work.
We want to dog them out if they ain't working.
Right, we dog them out, and then they have to go to work
right.
and pay for bad child care.
That's right.
And that's what we value, right? But imagine a policy, a world, how you would change business culture if you want it.
And we have models. This is the thing. The other countries that our country says are our allies, all in Europe, in England, in France, Germany, other places, They have much more parental leave, vacation leave. You know, hear people say it proudly. Ooh, I got so much vacation leave, you know, saved up because I never take a vacation. There, you know, in France, you have to.
Absolutely.
You have to take four weeks.
And they actually give you an au pair to help with the first 3 years. So.
Right, exactly. So it's like, you know, these are people we say know how to think well and move well in the world. Everybody in their country got health care.
That's right.
Right? Most folks have some kind of guaranteed income, and they mandate you take vacation and have a good time, and that you take time off when you have children, and they provide extra support for care of those children. That's the policy of the nation, because they know how they want their people to feel and be in the world. We can do this if we actually wanted to.
So the last two things, and they're not on the CDC list, but I actually really just heard two studies recently that came out. One was living in mixed income neighborhoods. Again, think about that as a social policy. Communities are less violent when everybody, no matter where, if you make a lot of money or a little bit of money, all live together, and everybody's in school together, and everybody's doing it together. Communities do better.
That's right.
That schools value kids, and then and that kids really feel valued by the educational system, not just through a social service program, but that everybody's taking an investment in making sure that all kids are successful. And then the last one, so economics, mixed income neighborhood, and then and I don't know why I'm losing the last one.
Shoot!
I know, and it was really, and I just,
well, while it's coming to you, I want to point out to folks the real point that Karen is trying to make here.
Oh, it's a full employment policy.
Then we were talking about that.
That's right.
How different would this country be if we said we're committed to full employment? We accept all this unemployment, and a lot of it isn't even declared. We don't even know how much unemployment we have. And you know, the lie is what they call full employment may still be like
5% people unemployed.
5%
That's
people
socially
unemployed.
acceptable. 8 to 10% full employment.
If we had a commitment to full employment,
that meant
we
everybody
would organize this country very
That's
differently.
Right. And so one of the things that we're not going to do it today, but one of the things that people are going to start seeing at Access, because we're really committed going back to our roots around improving the community's capacity to take care of its own and what's been happening in the community, and we've been listening to people. So please continue to provide us feedback. Please, please, please. Like, it's been so helpful recently.
It's really
people have been
important.
talking back
people
to
are
us.
Listening.
So one of the things that we're going to start sending out is sort of a weekly blurb asking people, sort of like, you know how people do the garage sales where they have the call-in show and they're like, hey, I need a lawnmower. Do you have a lawnmower? We're going to start doing that with skills and talents. So when you got something, we're going to be like, hey, we got a parent who wants to work in food service. Who needs somebody to help out with their cookout? Or we have a kid who really wants to learn how to, and then as we think about it as a community, because we do believe that everybody who wants a job, everybody who wants a job should have some way of expressing.
Bartering, trading, and sharing.
Absolutely. So, now, that doesn't transform our neighborhoods, because
but it makes us more self-sufficient and more self-determined. So what the main point I think that we get out of today is that, again, we always want to proceed from a love ethic, and we're not scared to use that word or express that emotion and all that it means. And also that when we talk about mental health and healing, we aren't just talking about therapy in an office or different therapeutic methods, but also national policies and practices of institutions and corporations all are connected to our mental health and well-being. So there are multiple levels on which we need to address what we need in our community, and it's all not just getting somebody not to hit somebody else. So on that note, this is Access Live. Keep holding hands, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Access Live. Access Initiative is a trauma and justice-informed system of care. We're glad that you joined us today. Please join us every Wednesday at 2:00 p.m. for Access Live. Thank you and be well.